Thank you. Thank you very much. I just had a great conversation with the leading faith leaders of our country. It went extremely well. We learned a lot. I learned a lot, and we're working on some things that are very interesting and very positive. I thank them all for being on the call. And yesterday, we unveiled detailed guidelines for America's governors to initiate a phased, safe, and gradual reopening of America. That's what's happening. The guidelines provide governors with the fact-driven and science-based metrics they will need to make the decisions that are right for their own particular state. To view the guidelines, you can go to the website at whitehouse.gov/openingamerica. So that's whitehouse.gov/openingamerica. Treasury has sent out economic relief payments to more than 80 million Americans who have their direct deposit information on file with the IRS, and an incredible success it has been. If you have not received your check, please visit irs.gov, get my payment. How about that one? irs.gov, get my payment. That way the IRS can get you your payment in days, and they've done a fantastic job, I have to say, and you won't have to wait for a check in the mail. I have some very good news. We sent out 80 million deposits, and less than 1% had even little problems. A couple had minor glitches, but it's substantially less than 1%. So out of 80 million deposits, less than 1%, and that gets corrected immediately. So just please do as I say. You'll get that very quickly, very easily. Today, I'm also announcing that Secretary Perdue, who happens to be right next to me, handsome man, and the Department of Agriculture will be implementing a $19 billion relief program for our great farmers and ranchers as they cope with the fallout of the global pandemic. Very honored to be doing this. Our farmers, ranchers, we have, these are great people, great Americans. Never complain. They never complain. They just do what they have to do. The program will include direct payments to farmers as well as mass purchases of dairy, meat, and agricultural produce to get that food to the people in need. The USDA will receive another $14 billion in July that will have funding to continue helping, and this will help our farmers and our ranchers, and it's money well deserved. So not only were they targeted at one point by China, and that was over a period of time, and you saw that happening, and they never complained, but that worked out very well. $12 billion they got, and $16 billion they got, and now it's $19 billion. And I'm just going to ask Secretary Perdue to explain exactly how we're going to handle it. Thank you.
Well, Mr. President, you may remember earlier this year, you tweeted a message to our farmers and ranchers that no matter the circumstances, you pledged to stand behind them. And while none of us could ever have anticipated this type of pandemic that we're currently in, I think today's announcement is proof that you have our farmers' backs and that you will continue to do what it takes to support them, and they are very grateful. We've heard a lot recently, all of you, about our food supply chain. I think America now knows that more than ever that the wholesome food that our families depend upon and starts with America's farmers and ranchers. Agriculture has been hard hit like most of America with the coronavirus, and President Trump is standing with our farmers and all Americans to make sure we all get through this national emergency. So today, thanks to your direction and leadership, Mr. President, USDA is announcing the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program. As you mentioned, this new $19 billion program will take several immediate actions to assist farmers, ranchers, and consumers in response to the COVID-19 national emergency. The program is really divided into two parts. One is a direct payment, $16 billion in direct payments to farmers, ranchers, and producers who've experienced unprecedented losses during this pandemic. Since we wanted to get the payments out to producers as quickly as possible, we decided to use the funds in the CCC, the current funds of $6.5 billion, combined with the 19.5 of COVID money, rather than wait for the replenishment of the CCC funds in July. Based on industry estimates of damage, Mr. President, it is becoming apparent that we'll need the additional CCC funds as we continue to track the economic losses. Secondly, and this is really important as well, the USDA will be purchasing $3 billion in fresh produce, dairy, and meat products to be distributed to Americans in need through our food bank networks, as well as other community and faith-based organizations. Having to dump milk or plow under vegetables ready to market is not only financially distressing, but it's heartbreaking as well to those who produce them. This program will not only provide direct financial relief to our farmers and ranchers, Mr. President, but will allow for the purchase and distribution of our agricultural abundance in this country to help our fellow Americans in need. So in recent weeks, all of us have seen the heroic patriotism of our food supply chain workers that have shown day in and day out doing the work to serve the needs of fellow Americans. Our farmers have been in the fields planting and doing what they do every spring to feed the American people, even with the pandemic as we speak. I want to thank you, Mr. President, for your unwavering support. They want to thank you for your unwavering support for America's farmers and ranchers, and I want to commit to you, Mr. President, and to the American people that USDA will do everything in our power to implement this program as quickly and as efficiently as possible to help our farmers, ranchers, producers, and consumers during this great time of need. So thank you very much for having me here today, and God bless you, God bless America, God bless American agriculture.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Sonny. So our great Secretary of Agriculture was the governor of Georgia for 8 years, and the only reason he isn't still there, frankly, is that he was term limited. And I said, let's get him for agriculture. You've done a fantastic job. We want to thank you very much. 8 years at Georgia. We really appreciate it. Great job. Even as we prepare to rebuild our economy, America continues to wage an all-out medical war to defeat the invisible enemy. To date, we have conducted more than 3.78 million coronavirus tests, by far the most of any country. It's not even close. In the hardest hit areas such as New York and Louisiana, we've also tested more people per capita than South Korea, Singapore, and every other country. The United States has the most robust, advanced, and accurate testing system anywhere in the world. As of yesterday, we have distributed nearly 660,000 Abbott IDs. Now, that's an incredible test. It's called the ID Now Point of Care Diagnostic Test, and it's fantastic. It's the hot one. Problem with this business is it's a hot one till about 2 days from now, because we do have a saliva test that just came out, and that can be self-administered, and it's said to be fantastic. I want to thank Abbott Laboratories. They have been incredible. I want to thank Roche. They've likewise been incredible. Over the last several days, we've seen a dramatic increase in the number of tests conducted by hospitals and academic institutions, which have now performed nearly 600,000 tests. There's a tremendous amount of unused capacity in the states available for governors to tap. We have tremendous unused capability within those laboratories, and I hope the governors are going to be able to use them. The governors are responsible for testing, and I hope they're going to be able to use this tremendous amount of available capacity that we have. It's up to 1 million additional tests per week. When you think of that, in the next few weeks, we'll be sending out 5.5 million testing swabs to the state. Swabs can be done easily by the governors themselves. Mostly it's cotton. It's not a big deal. You can get cotton easily, but if they can't get it, we will take care of it. Yesterday, the FDA announced a new collaboration with United Health Group, the Gates Foundation, Quantigen, and U.S. Cotton to greatly expand the supply of essential swabs, including a new polyester Q-tip type swab for the coronavirus testing. All of these actions will help our testing capability continue to grow dramatically. So we're helping people even with swabs. We get ventilators. We're now the king of ventilators. We have hundreds of thousands under construction. We don't need them ourselves. The governors are in great shape. If we do, we have a great stockpile that we'll immediately send to the state in need. But we've handled that situation incredibly well. I hope people understand it. I wish the media would get the word out. What we've done in ventilators is amazing because they're big, expensive, and highly complex. We're speaking to other countries. I spoke to President of Mexico today, a great gentleman, and I told him that we are going to be helping him out with ventilators, helping Mexico out, and we'll be helping some other countries too. We have a lot of very high-level, high-quality ventilators, and they're here, and they're also being manufactured as we speak. Following the announcement of our reopening guidelines, there have been some very partisan voices in the media and politics who have spread false and misleading information about our testing capacity. It's totally false and misleading, demonstrating a complete failure to understand the enormous scope of the testing capabilities that we've brought online. And we started really from ground zero. We started from really being very, very outdated and obsolete as a country from the past. And I will say this, if they didn't understand it, it's just really, unfortunately, I hate to say this because we've been getting along very well, but it would be false reporting because they understand the capability. And it's going to be up to the states to use that capability. The states have local points where they can go. The governor can call the mayors, and the mayors can call representatives, and everybody. Everything is perfect. And that's the way it should work and always should work. We'll help New York and all of the other states get even better on their testing. We have to get even better. And some people think a little bit differently. There are areas where you have vast amounts of area where you have very few people and almost no people are infected. And those places will be looked upon differently by different governors. And I think you're going to have a lot of news coming out about that over the next few days. I think certain states are going to come online, and they're going to start the early stages of the puzzle that we're putting together. And it's going to be together sooner rather than later. A lot of really incredible things are happening. And at some point in the not too distant future, we're going to have our country back. And it's going to be, I think, really with what we're doing on stimulus and helping people keep their businesses together and their lives together and their jobs, it's going to be better than ever before. I hope so. I really do. The current conversation is reminiscent of what happened on ventilators. You remember that when requests were made far beyond what was objectively needed. We were hearing from a certain state, and we were hearing from a lot that they needed far more ventilators. In one case, they wanted 40,000 ventilators, 40,000. It turned out that they had plenty, and they had a number of about 7,000 or 8,000, and that was plenty. We supplied them with a lot, but that was the right number. We got it just about right. And if they did need more, we're ready to give more. But I think the surge seems to be over. And there are a lot of governors just doing a great job, and they're working with us, but we're all working together. The research and development that we've done at the federal level has been absolutely incredible. The media will be accepting of these figures when they get to see the end result. I think they're going to see it, and I think they're already seeing it. That includes not only ventilators, but beds. We built, in most cases, far more than they even needed. But we wanted to err on the side of caution. This is what the governors wanted. They wanted a certain amount in Louisiana. I spoke with the governor, had a long talk with him, and I said, "Do you think you'll need that final hospital?" And they actually didn't need it. We built a lot of beds, so I appreciate it from the governor. And we saved building a hospital. In New York, we did, I think, just a spectacular job at the Javits Center. And even sending the ship up we brought it into COVID, but they didn't really need it. It didn't get much use, but it was there and ready. It wasn't supposed to be used for that purpose. We changed it into that purpose. And it was there, ready, willing, and able. Same with Javits, but they didn't quite need the rooms that the beds that we produced. So we produced almost 2,900 beds, and I think I'd rather tell you that we were overprepared than we were underprepared. And that was a good faith effort by New York, I have to say that. A very good faith effort, but it's nice that we didn't need that. Instead of needing it, it was not very occupied, but it was ready to go. Still there should something happen, but I think they have it under very good control. As you'll hear from our experts today, we've already built sufficient testing capacity nationwide for states to begin their reopenings. And I think you'll be hearing a lot about reopenings in the coming weeks and months. Most excitingly, in the coming weeks, I think you're going to see some very, very dramatic steps taken, and very safely. We're putting safety first. We may be opening, but we're putting safety first. And when you look at the numbers, when you look at the possible number of deaths at 2.2 million people, and it could have very well been that. It could have been more. Frankly, I've been looking at numbers where it could have been higher than that. 2.2 million people dying. If you figure we lost 500,000, maybe 600,000 in the Civil War, 2.2 million people. A minimum, if we did nothing, would have been 1.6. If you cut that in half, you're talking about 800,000, 900,000, a million people dying. But we did a lot of work, and the people of this country were incredible, I have to say. And I think we're heading to the other category, and that would be if we did work and if it was successful. They had between 100,000 and 220,000 to 240,000 on the upside. And I think we'll be substantially, hopefully, below the 100 number. And I think right now we're heading at probably around 60, maybe 65,000. And one is too many. I always say it, one is too many. It's a horrible thing that happened to our country. There's a horrible thing that happened to 184 countries all over the world. There's a horrible thing, and there was no reason for it. It should never, ever happen again. In a few minutes, you'll be hearing from Dr. Redfield, Dr. Fauci, Dr. Birx, and Admiral Guar to explain these facts in really great detail. Earlier this week, the FDA authorized 2 new antibody tests, which is very exciting, that will determine if someone has been previously infected with the virus, bringing the total to 4 authorized antibody tests already. This will help us assess the number of cases that have been asymptomatic or mildly symptomatic, and support our efforts to get Americans back to work by showing us who might have developed the wonderful, beautiful immunity. Ultimate victory in this war will be made possible by America's scientific brilliance. There is nothing like us. There is nobody like us, not even close. I wish I could tell you stories what other countries, even powerful countries, say to me, the leaders. And they say it quietly and they say it off the record, but they have great respect for what we can do. And our country is at a point. A few weeks ago, think of it, 4 or 5 weeks ago, we were at a level that nobody had ever attained, the best job numbers we've ever had, the best economy we've ever had. Every company virtually was doing better business than ever before. The stock market was at all-time highs. And then one day they said, you got to close it up. And we did the right thing. We saved maybe millions of lives by doing it the way we did it. But we're paying a price, but that price is very unimportant compared to the number of lives we're talking about. The NIH and others are conducting clinical trials of 35 different therapies and treatments, therapies being so exciting to me, because that's really like, if something happens, you're going to get better reasonably quickly and without such a horrible deal as some people have to go through. To that end, today, NIH announced that it is launching a public-private partnership with more than a dozen biopharmaceutical companies. They're HHS, FDA, CDC, and the European Medicines Agency. They're all working together. We're working together with a lot of other countries. The partnership will marshal and coordinate the vast resources, knowledge, assets, and authorities of more than a dozen organizations and agencies to accelerate development of the most promising therapies and vaccines. The vaccines are coming along really, really well. Johnson & Johnson is very well advanced. One thing is they have to, we're having great success, but we have to test them, and it takes a long period of time. It takes probably over a year, unfortunately, but therapies likewise are coming along very, very well. Therapies are immediate when we get that. That'll be a big day. We're also equipping our medical warriors on the front lines. In total, we have the Project Air Bridge, and the Air Bridge has been incredible. The National Strategic Stockpile and every other channel the federal government has deployed. If you think about this, 44.5 million N95 masks, nearly 524 million gloves, 63.5 million surgical masks, and more than 10 million gowns. And we have 500 million masks coming in very soon between manufacturing and orders. 500 million masks. The last few months have been among the most challenging times in the history of our nation. This invisible enemy is tough, and it's smart, and it's vicious. But every day we're getting closer to the future that we all have been waiting for. I talk about the light at the end of the tunnel. We are getting very, very close to seeing that light shine very brightly at the end of that tunnel. And it's happening, and I want to thank everybody in the room. I want to thank I actually want to thank some of the media. We've had some fair coverage, some really fair coverage, and I appreciate it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce our great Vice President, Mike Pence, and he's going to take over for a little while. I'm going to leave, and I'm coming right back, and we'll take some questions. They're going to go over our tremendous testing capabilities. And again, I'll be right back. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good afternoon, all. Today, as the President just reflected, it remains a challenging time in the life of our nation. But because of the extraordinary efforts of the American people, because of the strong partnership the federal government has forged with states across the country, we're making progress, America. Despite the tragic loss of more than 36,000 Americans. According to our best data reporting this morning, we continue to see new cases low and steady on the West Coast, and we continue to see cases and hospitalizations declining in the greater New York City area, in New Orleans and Detroit, and elsewhere. This is a tribute, first and foremost, to our healthcare doctors, nurses, all of those working on the front lines. But it's also a great tribute to the American people who have put into practice the social distancing, the guidelines, the guidance of state and local officials. And we hope that every American is encouraged by the steady progress that we are making. We're continuing to bring, at the President's direction, the full resources of the federal government to bear. Today, the President approved a major disaster declaration for American Samoa, and now all 50 states and all territories are under major disaster declarations for the first time in American history. At this present moment, 33,000 National Guardsmen are on duty. 5,500 active duty military personnel have been deployed to 9 states, including 716 medical professionals, doctors, and nurses who deployed out to 14 different hospitals today. Among those were 10 hospitals in New York City, and military personnel were also serving today in hospitals in Connecticut, Texas, Louisiana, and New Jersey. Yesterday, as the President reflected, we unveiled the President's guidelines for opening up America again. There were 2 parts at the beginning of those guidelines. First, the criteria that we hope will guide governors in their decisions about reopening their states on either a statewide level or a county level. And then also we outlined what we believe would be the most important state responsibilities to have in place before moving into a reopening plan. For phase one, the President's guidelines, you'll recall, advise that states that have a downward trajectory in cases over a 14-day period of time and ensure that they have proper capacity in their healthcare facilities could move to phase one with the easing of some of the social distancing and the criteria that have been in place. But for states that meet the criteria, we outlined specific responsibilities, protecting workers in critical industries, particularly protecting the most vulnerable, those who live and work in senior care facilities. And we also encourage states to have a plan for testing symptomatic individuals and ensuring testing to our most vulnerable populations. As the President has made clear, governors will decide the time and manner that their states reopen, and we will look to support them in that effort. But as we assured the American people yesterday, with the President's direction, our administration will continue to work with governors across the country to ensure that they have the equipment and the supplies and the testing resources to reopen safely and responsibly. On the subject of supplies, today we issued a letter to our nation's governors summarizing all the medical equipment and supplies that have been distributed to their state from FEMA between the 1st of this month and April 14th through Project Airbridge and through the Commercial Supply Network. We'll be speaking with our nation's governors on Monday and detailing that information at that time. As of April 16th, as the President reflected briefly, FEMA has coordinated the delivery of millions of pieces of medical equipment, including 44 million N95 respirators, 63 million surgical masks, more than 10,000 ventilators, and of course deployed more than 8,600 federal medical station beds. On the subject of testing resources, we're going to take some time to speak about our administration's approach in partnership with states to continue to expand testing across the country at this briefing. But from the very outset of this epidemic, President Trump made efforts to essentially reinvent testing in America. The traditional testing in this country that takes place at CDC or at state labs was designed for basically the kind of diagnostic testing that is routinely required. But the President early on in this effort brought together the leading commercial labs in America. We forged a public and private partnership. And 6 weeks ago, we had performed some 25,000 tests, and at this day, we have performed 3.7 million tests. We believe that labs and hospitals are now performing more than 120,000 tests a day, and we've actually stood up a team from Walter Reed under the direction of Dr. Deborah Birx that is working around the clock to identify additional testing capacity across the country. We believe that states could actually more than double the amount of daily testing that is happening today by simply activating all of the labs. And Dr. Birx will detail some of those resources today, and we'll be going over those very specifically with governors on Monday. We've also been promoting the development of new and innovative tests. We all know about the 15-minute Abbott test, but the FDA is currently working on an antibody test that literally could add 20 million new tests to our supply even before the end of April. I want to assure the American people that we're going to continue to work with your governors and with your state health officials to scale testing in the days ahead. But as you'll hear from all of our experts tonight, our best scientists and health experts assess that states today have enough tests to implement the criteria of phase one if they choose to do so. Let me say that again. Given the guidance in the President's new guidelines for opening up America again, states that meet the criteria for going into phase one and then are preparing the testing that is contemplated by going to phase one, our best scientists and health experts assess that today we have a sufficient amount of testing to meet the requirements of a phase one reopening if state governors should choose to do that. And you'll hear more detail on that in just a moment. At the President's direction, we're going to be presenting an outline of our approach to testing in partnership with states during this briefing. Our approach will continue to be locally executed, state managed, and federally supported. Dr. Fauci will give us a brief introduction to the overall approach to testing that is contemplated to deal with the coronavirus. Dr. Redfield of the CDC will describe our plan to mobilize CDC officials in all 50 states to specifically monitor coronavirus incidents that occur in every state in the union. Of course, Dr. Deborah Birx will describe not only our tests, but also the current capability and the capability that we could expand to very readily. And Admiral Giroir of the U.S. Public Health Service will summarize our approach. But I want to assure the American people that at the President's direction, we are going to continue to work every single day to make sure that our states and communities have the testing they need to reopen at the time and manner of their choosing. And we're going to work every day to make sure our states have the resources and the supplies to reopen their states and reopen America in a safe and responsible way. With that, Dr. Fauci.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. So as the Vice President said, I'm going to give you a brief introduction to kind of answer the question that we've been asked a lot. In fact, we had a very productive teleconference with the Senate Democratic Caucus just a few hours ago, and they asked a number of questions which were really reasonable questions, questions that are on the mind of a lot of different people. And one of them was the question that was just posed a moment ago, is are there enough tests to allow us to be able to go through this first phase in a way that is protective of the health and the safety of the American people? So I just want to spend a couple of minutes clarifying a few things and maybe providing some information on a broad 40,000 foot, which you'll hear some of the more granular details from my colleagues who will be following me. I think they asked me to give the 40,000 foot one because I'm not a testing person. I didn't run a testing lab, but I'm part of a team that is looking at this, of how we can best make sure this happens in the right way. So first of all, let me say something that we said before, and I apologize if I'm repeating things that you already know, but I think in some respects it's important to do that so that people have clarity in what we're talking about. There are two general types of tests, even though within each general type there are different subgroups. One of them is to actually test for the infection. Is a person infected? The other, and I'll get back to that in a second, the other is to test, as was just mentioned, if someone has been infected. Usually someone has been infected who has recovered, and as I'll get to in a moment, that you could assume, although we need to do some more work on that, that person is actually protected against subsequent exposure and infection with an identical organism. So what are some of the pluses and minuses of each? Because the pluses and minuses are really going to impact how we best use the test and how the test actually should be used. So let's take the test for whether or not you're infected. The test of whether or not you're infected is a test that right now is called a nucleic acid test. It's not an easy test to do. There are some that are more rapid. There are some that have a high throughput. There are different groups within that. The good news about that is that it's a sensitive and specific test, so that if you're infected, you know you're infected, so that, as I'll get to in a moment, if you need to do something with that, get that person, put them in care, take care of them, get them out of circulation. That's important. The part about that that I think is often misunderstood is that if you get a test today, like I did today, it's negative. If you get a test today, that does not mean that tomorrow or the next day or the next day or the next day, as you get exposed perhaps from someone who may not even know they're infected, that means that I'm negative, which means if you take that to its extreme, in order to be really sure, you would almost have to test somebody either every day or every other day or every week or what it is to be absolutely certain. That's an issue. Now, the problem that I talk about when I try and compare this to other situations, with what testing means to you. I'm, as I think most people know, have been involved in HIV/AIDS for 38 years, 39 years, from the very first week of HIV. So that's what I do. If you get a test for HIV and you are negative and you do not practice any risk behaviors, you can be guaranteed that next month, 6 months, 1 year from now, you will be negative if you don't have a risk behavior. So there's a big difference there about what testing actually means. So the point I think you're getting is that although there is clearly a place for needing to test somebody for a given reason, a test means you're negative now. Now, the other test is an antibody test, a test that tells you, in fact, that you've been infected. That's really good. You're going to hear a bit about that from my colleagues in a moment, because that will give you a broader view of two things. One, what the penetrance of the infection had been. And number two, you can make an assumption, though we still need to prove that. I mean, we are assuming that if you're infected and you have antibody, you're protected. And I think that's a reasonable assumption based on our experience with other viruses. But what we want to make sure that we know, and these are some of the challenges, what is the titer that is protective? How long is the protection? Is it 1 month? Is it 3 months? Is it 6 months? It's a year. So we need to be humble and modest that we don't know everything about it, but it really is an important test. The other thing is the difference between testing and monitoring out there, what's out there. The difference between what we really need it for phase 1 is to be able to identify, isolate, contact trace, a very important part of when you're pulling back gradually and slowly on the mitigation, and you have people who might be infected. You want to know they're infected. You want to put them in care. That is something that we absolutely need to do. But there are other ways. I want to make sure people understand that not to underestimate the importance of testing. Testing is a part, an important part, of a multifaceted way that we are going to control and ultimately end this outbreak. So please don't anyone interpret it that I'm downplaying testing. But the emphasis that we've been hearing is essentially testing is everything, and it isn't. It's the kinds of things that we've been doing, the mitigation strategies that are an important part of that. Now, just a couple of things before I hand it over to my colleagues. No doubt that early on we had a problem. I have publicly said that we had a problem early on. There was a problem that had to be corrected, and it was corrected. It was a problem that was a technical problem from within that was corrected, and it was an issue of embracing the way we have now and should have the private sector, who clearly has the capability of making and providing tests at the level that we will need them for any of the things that I've just spoken about. So, having said that, right now, I totally understand, and I'm not alone, my colleagues understand, that although we say there are X number of tests out there, and you're going to hear from Admiral Giroir about that, the fact is there have been and still are situations that are correctable and will be corrected, and some of which have been corrected. I know I get on the phone a lot with my colleagues because, believe it or not, some long time ago, I was where they are in the hospitals, in the emergency room, looking at very sick individuals that you need to take care of. And I know what it means when someone tells you, hey, you have what you need, and you look around and you say, well, maybe you think I have what I need, but I don't really have what I need. So we have to figure out, how do we close that gap? And there are a lot of things that I think we've learned and that we are correcting and going to correct. Namely, you have a situation where tests are needed and appropriate, and either people have found there's no tests, or there's no reagents, or there's no swabs, or a person needed a test and were told that there was a restriction. They couldn't get a test. These are all the things that I'm telling you, you already know because you've heard them. So right now, or there's a delay of 5 to 7 days. And what does that mean if you want to get somebody out of circulation? We understand that that existed, but upon careful examination, what you are going to hear, that many of those have been already corrected and other of those will be corrected. Because what I think people don't appreciate through no fault of their own is that there are two issues. There's supply and demand. And if you have a supply that can meet the demand, but the supply is not connected to demand, then supply-demand falls apart. What do I mean by that?